You're listening to the I Love You Keep Going podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
So welcome, everybody. This is I Love You Keep Going. It is August 1st, 2024 at 7:36 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And I thought because of the How to Date Like a Secure Person workshop, I would talk about the advantages of not rushing into a relationship because it came up over and over again during the workshop. There was one hilarious comment when I said that you want to really slow it down so that it's 6 months or so you decide whether or not you want to take the relationship up to the next level. And the comment was that I expect to be married at 6 months into a relationship. So that kind of rushing into it. Really, the thing about the rushing in is not so much that you're building a relationship that's likely to work, but that the abandonment terror gets so intense that you think rushing in and making substantial commitments to the other person will relieve the abandonment terror, which it sometimes does. But then you have to negotiate within the relationship how the relationship is going to function after you've made these substantial commitments in the relationship. And often what you discover is either that you don't want to do some of the things that are required by those level of commitments, or that the person that you've entered into those agreements with isn't able to keep commitments that you would like to have. And so you're in a position of either needing to renege on the level of commitment you made or put up with somebody else not being able to meet the level of commitment that you've rushed into. And often what happens is a sense of betrayal arising in the relationship, or a sense of hopelessness arising because you are not in a position where you can actually keep the agreements that you've made. One of the things about going slow is that you can build a relationship that really supports what relationships are supposed to support, which is not as a refuge away from life, but as a platform or a base to explore from. When you look at this sort of duality, we like to say mostly when we talk about duality in Buddhist meditation circles, is the sense of self and world appearing as we create conceptual reality. So you have the capacity to sense the object that can be sensed when there's contact. A consciousness of the sensing experience arises. It's evaluated for urgency. Does it need immediate attention? Does it not matter? Is there time for a pleasant experience? Then that sets the order of the queue in terms of processing that sensing experience against the perceptual database. If there's a previously experienced sense experience in the database that matches closely enough to the current sensing experience, then that whole thread of meaning attaches and it rolls into conceptual reality. So we experience not what is actually happening, but what is happening means to us. And really what that sense of duality that happens is I am this self, this identity that is experiencing what's happening. That's one form of that duality. When in fact, the sensing experience is both the experience of self perceiving and what's being perceived. One aspect of that dualism. Another aspect of that dualism is life and death. Often when you grow up and the experiences of attempting to explore and find meaning from being alive is in some ways thwarted, you develop a fearfulness around engaging in life, and also a fearfulness around the eventuality of death. We tend to experience the fearfulness of life as this resistance to really going after the things that we find are meaningful to us. And that may be so inhibiting that we don't even know what's meaningful for us because we won't engage enough to find out. And the fearfulness of death actually contributes to this because if we're so fearful of death that we can't contemplate that this is a temporary existence, we think we can do it later. And it really feeds this reluctance to really engage and explore life. We're afraid to go out into the world, and we remove the pressure of needing to do that by thinking that we can get to it later, another form of that. So part of this is to recognize that there is no later and we have to do it now. And the moment in which we can do it comes and goes. And there's never another moment like that where we could do the thing that we could have done in that moment later. And that next moment is the next conditions. In Buddhism, we call that conditionality. But this moment sets up the conditions for the choices that are available in the next moment. The previous moment set up the choices that were available to us in this moment. I like the quantum physics analogy of that. In this next moment, what is opening in front of you is all of the possibilities that you could choose from, that unlimited possibility, which is often quite large. And then as soon as we choose something, everything falls away except for what we've chosen, and that becomes the reality of that moment. And tied to that reality in this moment are the choices that are available in the next moment. And so we move through these patterns of choosing. When we restrict what we allow ourselves to see and know about the present moment because of these fearfulnesses that arise, we often get into a habit or a pattern of choosing over and over again from the same small collections. We call that samsara. In the Pali word anyway for that is samsara, this rut that we get into, which comes from South Asia, really. When I was in Myanmar, the monastery was outside of a place called Pin U Luin, which was the barracks for the British Army when they were there at the 18th and 19th century for the summer, because it was too hot in the cities. And a lot of these dirt roads, and still the use of ox carts and these big wheeled carts moving through along these roads, which had these deep ruts cut into them, and you could see them turning and the wheels locking into the ruts. So that's that definition. We get locked into these ideas about ourselves, these limited beliefs, these fixed views, and then over and over again, only the choices that are permitted by the views are experienced, and so we choose over and over. When we pull away those fixed views, those limited ideas about ourselves and the world, what opens up, of course, is this wide range of choices. Choose as a way of exploring what's meaningful. The purpose of relationships, the purpose of adult relationships, is to give you a platform or a base, a secure base in which to explore from. And really the main thing that you need about that is that somebody who can emotionally regulate you when you get so dysregulated that you can't regulate yourself. So what we want to be able to do is become brilliant at regulating ourselves, just really capable in all sorts of situations to be able to manage the emotional responses that come in each moment of experience. There's an emotional response to that. What that really is the preparation to take an action in the next moment. And when they get too intense and they overwhelm our capacity to manage them, what we need to be able to do is rush back to somebody who will catch us and help us come back into balance. That's the purpose of it. It's like a safety net. And then to encourage us to continue to explore, to seek meaning in our life. So that dual purpose of the safety net that catches us, and then the encouragement that pushes us out the door to get to go back into this process of exploring. So talking about this in terms of primary and secondary exploration, secondary exploration is really whether you gather the time, energy, and resources that you need to explore. And then primary exploration is simply the pursuit of what's meaningful to you. Our capacities are quite varied, what our interests are quite varied. The means by which we discover meaning is quite varied. So there isn't one formula for that. There isn't one activity that provides that. But I think that in understanding the nature of creativity and a life that's involved in a creative exploration, spiritual practice is one of those avenues of exploration where we can derive meaning. And that's what I think is important to understand. Sometimes when you say creativity, you're thinking art or writing, something like that. But actually, creativity has a lot of ways of expressing itself, and certainly spiritual practice and really coming into a fruitful practice where you discover the nature of this human condition is one of them that's worth doing. Doesn't have to be the more conventional aspects. One of the things about risk taking in exploration is that if you get really knocked sideways and really spun out from exploring, and in spiritual pathways to exploration, you can get really spun out in terms of the way that you've conceptualized what life is, and then the discoveries that you make that are more in line with what the actual experience is that we're having. That those defensive structures that we create that allow us to hold the experiences that we have that depend on the defensiveness and a restriction of what actually is happening. When you practice meditation, all of that can be adversely affected in terms of the integrity of the defense, and then you're left defenseless to know the things that are actually happening rather than what you allow yourself to. And so it is useful to have people around you who can understand that, particularly in spiritual practice. As you get further and further along the path, there's a kind of attrition to people who can really what you're talking about, what you're experiencing. We cannot throw everybody else away. It's too lonely to do that. We need to find a way to be in relationship. So what I'm hoping you're hearing from me is this understanding that that safety net to catch you so that you can really take big risks in your exploration is the capacity to emotionally regulate you. So the thing that I think that you should do at the beginning is discern whether or not somebody is emotionally regulating for you or not. And the understanding of this is that it's an autonomic response, it's an automatic response, it's largely an unconscious response, and it's not something that's easily trainable. And so what you really need to do is find somebody whose conditioning matches yours well enough so that they integrate, and you have the experience of being regulated just by being with them in their the unconscious flow of inner connection. There's a group of scientists that have calculated that the body mind can track about 11 million bits of data per second. And that same group has determined that the conscious experience of self tracks about 16 bits per second. So when I say that it's an unconscious autonomic process to be able to co-regulate with somebody else, we're really talking about the 10,999,000 bits of information interacting with the other unconscious 10,999,000 bits, not the self experience, which knows whether you're regulated or not. And so what you have to do is hang out with somebody and pay attention to whether they're regulating for you. That's the main thing at the beginning of relationships. Do I feel better? Do I feel the same? Do I feel worse? You need to feel better. You need that person to be regulating for you and that you to feel better for it to be worth the time, energy, and resources that you need to provide to the relationship to support it. And then you need to be able to regulate them. And so what you're looking for in the beginning is you're regulated by them and they're regulated by you. If they're not regulated by you, they won't put the time, energy, and into the relationship to support it at the level that you'll need, because they're not getting out of it the thing that is essential. And when you rush into a relationship and you skip over that part, you don't know with reliability in a lot of different situations whether they're regulating for you or not. And you'll have committed to putting all of this resource into a relationship that ultimately will not provide that essential capacity to regulate you. One of the things I noticed about the couples work I did was that the crux of the problem was one person was not regulated by the other person. Sometimes both, but mostly it was just one person not regulated. Mudit?
And regulated regardless of the situation, like the situation. Like, what if, are you saying when they're in a fight they should be regulating, or just all the time in general?
Well, if you're in a fight and you're with somebody who regulates you, even though you're in a fight with them, it makes it much easier to negotiate a settlement that will work for both people. If you become dysregulated in a fight and they no longer have the capacity to regulate you, then your cognitive mind will go offline and you won't be able to solve the problem in the relationship easily. You really have to separate it until you can re-regulate and then come back and attempt to negotiate it while you're in a place of regulation. And as soon as you get dysregulated, if they aren't able to help you, and even in those moments of distress to regulate, then it will interfere with discovering solutions.
Yeah, somehow being regulated while being in a fight,
Right.
like, doesn't.
Or a conflict might be better.
Like arguing, like our couples argue all the time, but this is at that point, the idea that somebody's regulating for me or for the other person is just very interesting.
Well, the reason that people fight in relationships is because there's a conflict that isn't being resolved. So really when we talk about negotiating conflicts in a way that you come up with a creative solution, so this is a collaborative, creative exploration of solving the inability of the two systems to connect. That would be one way to describe it. Your system for resolving conflicts is not meshing very well with their system for regulating conflict. You need to build a bridge that integrates the two systems, and you need to come up with a pathway to resolve the difficulty that comes up. And you need to find a solution that's a solid win-win for both people, and commit to doing it so that the conflict settles. So you'll notice in secure functioning relationships, there's a sense of confidence that the parties can come up with a creative solution to solve the problem, and there's an expectation that that will happen, and that agreements can be made and kept, and so that settles the disagreement. And the longer the relationship is operating, and the more of those conflicts are settled, the less and less there's what you would call a fight. And it's when you don't successfully negotiate those things, and the conflicts come up over and over again. If you would say that a couple is constantly fighting, it really means that they're unable to manage conflict in the relationship. And what begins to happen there is not so much that the content of the fights breaks up the relationship, but there's a sense of hopelessness that develops, and a sense of disappointment that the problems aren't solvable. And that the loss of confidence and hope that you can solve the problems in the relationship is usually the thing that tips them over. If you had the sense of complete confidence that you and your partner could negotiate any conflict and come up with a solution that would work for both of you over the long term, then those relationships tend to be pretty solid. Is that making sense?
I mean, it's funny that this aspect doesn't include you, and you don't mean like dysregulated and insecure person has his or her own problems. Like the other person can still be regulating regardless of the other person being insecure, attachment.
Right.
That's what I get, because I feel like that's the other person's mind, which is causing more blocks in solving the problem, which has nothing to do with the conflict, but their own views and ideals.
So if you have a preoccupied person and the strategy that they use is helplessness, they're going to be scanning for problems and presenting problems as a way of connecting. But, you know, if they're connected to a dismissing person and they present a pretend problem that needs to be solved, the dismissing person can pretend to solve the problem, and there can be an energy between them where one feels like the damsel or the dude in distress, and the other one is the white knight that rescues. So one is always being rescued by the other, and there's an advantage to each of them in that presentation that is not the same thing as unresolvable conflicts. In fact, those kinds of relationships can negotiate themselves well enough that it's pretty stable. That makes sense. It's that when you get emotionally dysregulated and you can't find emotional equilibrium, and that your partner can't help you find emotional equilibrium, that it gets chaotic. And in that chaos, you can often, in those expressions of fearfulness or anger, do something that irrevocably damages the relationship. That's really one of the things that makes this particular focus so essential in terms of establishing relationships. Are you regulating for me? And are you regulating for me in a lot of situations? And am I regulating for you in a lot of situations?
So you mentioned about the preoccupied looking for problems to connect. That's only when the person is dysregulated. Isn't that the person's problem then? That's causing more problems.
Well, it isn't probably the most effective strategy for connecting, but it certainly is a strategy for connecting. And depending on who you connect to, if you present somebody with a pretend problem and they're very happy presenting you with a pretend solution, that can go on pretty much forever.
I see.
Each of you getting the thing out of it that you want. It's not
Oh,
particularly intimate, but two roles like that could find a way of working.
I forgot that preoccupied looks for problems to connect.
Yes. Once you figured out that you are regulating for the other person and they are regulating for you, then the next thing you really need to look at is how do you have to take care of them so that they feel well taken care of? And one of the things that happens here is that you have your way of being taken care of, and you value it in a certain way. And other people often need to be taken care of in a way that doesn't map on to the way that you need to be taken care of. And you can often undervalue or dislike the things that the other person requires to feel well taken care of. And because you don't value them, you don't see the value of them for other people, and so you don't do them well enough for them. So you really want to look at this idea of how do you want to be taken care of, and do I enjoy it enough that I would be willing to do it over the long term? Because if you don't enjoy it and you're not willing to do it, and you don't do it, then the other person doesn't feel taken care of, and there's a friction in the relationship. And then you can focus on whether or not they like to take care of you in the way that you need to be taken care of. And you need to explain that to them so that they really understand what to do, and they need to explain to you so that you really understand what you need to do. And then you can begin to settle that into this pattern of care. And really the idea is that they explain to you a few times and they teach you how to take care of them. And they teach you the signals that suggest that they need that care. And then you track that, you monitor that. And when you see that they need the care based on how they're doing, you provide that care for them, and then they do the same for you. Remember, in some sense, what you're doing is taking care of the person who takes care of you. And the better you take care of them, the better shape they are in to take care of you. And that's the synergy in the relationship. And it's not transactional in the sense that you're taking on the whole care. And often what happens in relationships is that it's unequal. One person needs more care than the other person does, but the person who needs less care provides that so that when they need the care, it's available to them. That actually is the source of that freedom to really take risks in your exploration, because you have a safety net and you're confident that that safety net is going to be there to catch you so that you can go that extra distance. And if you rush into relationships too fast and you've skipped over the emotional regulation part so that that's not reliable for either of you, and you don't really focus on whether you're going to be game to provide the care that the other person needs and they're going to be able to provide for you, it's easy to get into a place of that not happening very well. One of the common things that happens in couples work is that one person is quite satisfied in the relationship and the other person is not satisfied in the relationship. And because there hasn't been this collaborative exploration around what each person's care needs to be, the person who's taken care of well enough doesn't really register why the person who isn't feeling taken care of isn't satisfied, because their experiences being quite satisfied in the relationship. Then you can get on to the last piece. And this is the piece that I think the part that we've talked about is going to take 6 months to get through. Does it make sense for the thing that is your primary exploration, the source of meaningfulness in your life? Does it make sense for you to travel with somebody else based on what their primary exploration is? Because what is going to happen between intimate partners is a free-flowing discussion about the sources of meaning that each of you are gathering. And does it make sense based on what those paths are for that exchange of information to really float the relationship or allow it to take off in this synergy where not only are you interested in what the other person is discovering, but what they're discovering in some way is useful to you in terms of your exploration, and what you're discovering is not only interesting to the other person, but also useful to them in their exploration. So if we were to talk about spiritual practice being that creative flow, that part of the relationship, that the understandings and the perspectives that each of you develop in your practice as expressed to the other person can be extremely useful. And the different points of view, the different perspectives on practice can also help illuminate for each of you the nature of this thing that we're trying to understand about the human condition. So there's a great trajectory that can come from that, a great sense of support. I did mention earlier that not everybody is going to be interested in a creative exploration of spiritual practice. And if you're going to form a relationship with someone where the aspects of primary exploration are not around that, but around something else, an artistic practice or a business practice or whatever it is that matters, there needs to be permission for you to pursue your spiritual practice, particularly when you get into primary relationships, because if there is a commingling of time, energy, and resources, you're going to need time, energy, and resources to pursue your spiritual practice. And if the other person isn't willing to grant that in the relationship, it can be interfering with the capacity to explore that. So I guess it's 25 years ago or so, with Shinzen would explained that you don't need a partner that practices, but you need a partner who supports your practice and gives you permission to go on retreats, because if you don't go on retreats, you won't have enough depth in your practice to really come into the insights that are necessary to understand the nature of the human condition. Of course, if you can do that, come into this understanding, it frees you up from the fearfulness of death enough that it doesn't interfere. You don't need to put things off and do them later. And it also allows you to pursue, to really engage in the activities of being alive. Even if there is fearfulness, it doesn't prevent you from engaging. Udit? You put your hand up, no?
Oh yeah, I just want to ask, is there you've seen couples discuss their problems. Is there themes of care that you see people discussing? Is it standard like physical touch, or is it like more materialistic things? It's
Well,
variations in what do you see, what people want than looking for care?
The distribution of material wealth in our society is very unequal and really organized around class. So it would depend on the class of the person, how much that was something that was important. Really, the upper middle class or better is more organized around that. But they also are the ones that have access to it, and people who are not in that situation don't really. And so it's less important. I do think that one way to understand it is to look at it through the attachment lens and what that early conditioning causes you to want in a relationship, and then how those things match up. So the most common coupling in our culture is secure people with secure people. And so they're much more interested in an intimate relationship that's creative and collaborative, and a focus on exploration and meaning comes with that. The second most popular coupling is a dismissing person with a preoccupied person. And so depending on how the balance is achieved there, the dismissing person tends to receive the care, and the preoccupied person tends to deliver the care. And if the dismissing person does not see the value of some reciprocation, the preoccupied person tends to burn out. And so the quality and reliability of the care is hit or miss in those kinds of relationships. But usually they're organized so that the dismissing person feels well taken care of, and the preoccupied person's care is not attended to pretty well.
For other themes of care you've seen in couples?
Well, when you talk about physical touch or something like that, depending on what your early attachment conditioning is, also is reflective of what your touch requirements are. For instance, dismissing people are profoundly neglected, and so they don't have a lot of touch in their childhoods. They don't have a lot of skin-to-skin contact, and so they don't tend to develop the language of physical touch. And in fact, physical touch can be problematic for them. They have difficulty with the tactile quality of the body. They have difficulty of the scent of the body. It can be even restrictive in the way sex is expressed, because they don't like a lot of entwining sex. They like sort of positions that are that still allow them a sense of autonomy. Preoccupied people are often seeking constant proximity, physical proximity as well. And that's because they use it as a way of regulating themselves. Now, that because they tend to mesh with the other person, and they tend to reorder their internal understanding of emotions so that the empathetic experience of the other person is primary and their own emotions secondary. Of course, with an empathetic experience of someone else, you don't need physical touch, which is harder with a dismissing person, but you need proximity so that you can be engaged empathetically in the experience of them. And so they like to have proximity. So the negotiation is around proximity. The dismissing person, of course, because they suppress their emotions and don't really have a conscious experience of them, are regulated by the preoccupied person in that empathetic exchange with them, even though they're not conscious of it. So they also like the proximity. They just might not like it as in terms of physical touch. And so when you're negotiating that proximate experience with a degree of physicality to it, that would make something that you would need to do. Often in transactional relationships, the transaction is coded for affection. one of the expressions of that in the training that we did was that on Fridays, the husband, this was a typical hetero couple, would pick up a bunch of flowers and bring it home. And every Friday, pretty much, he did that. And that registered as being an expression of love. But one Friday they were out of bouquets and he came home without it, and that turned into an expression of not being loved, even though that was the only gesture. So the teleological mode of expression, and that moves into the realm of the material type of expression. So, but really, each of our conditioning is unique, and each of the meanings that we assign to these kinds of gestures is ours. And really, what we're supposed to do in terms of developing a relationship with somebody else who you're going to allow to take care of you is to explain to them what it is that you need, so that you have that sense of comfort and care. And then you exchange that. In a collaborative way, you take it on, and in a transactional way, it's tit for tat. I do this, you do that. I do this, you do that. In a collaborative system, it's I take on all of your care and you take on all of my care. And then with disorganized people, it's more around trauma bonding. Dan Brown used to say, for every bite, there's a set of teeth that matches. And so if you're wounded and haven't really been able to free yourself from the traumatic experiences, what you're often doing is finding somebody who you relate to in that trauma bonded way, which is in some sense you see them in the way that the relationship with the perpetrator went, and they see you in the way that the relationship with their perpetrator went. And when you come out of that sense of balance, you get locked into these reenactment scenarios. Is that making sense? Really what we're talking about here, and when we talk about spiritual practice and really seeing the nature of the human condition, it is the willingness to express authentically what our conditioning is and how it's affected us, so that other people can really see us and understand the nature of how we function in this human condition. And to when you really come into this place of understanding the effects of your experiences, the effects of your conditioning, and how that's led to advantages and disadvantages, and neither one of them you need to promote or get away from, that you can just be in this open experience of your conditioned self, and that you can express that in a neutral way to somebody else, so that they can actually see you. And then you actually can be well taken care of, because they can know you and know what to do, and hopefully they'll do that for you. And then in that freedom of that expression, you don't have to be inhibited in engaging in life, and you don't have to come up with these defenses and these denials of the temporary nature of the human form, so that you really can fully engage each moment as it comes and goes without undue suffering because of it. How's that? So go slow. Really get to know somebody. Know what you have to do to take care of them. Know what they have. Tell them what they have to do to take care of you, and see that they're capable of that. Understand at the base of that is that emotional regulation, and then really find out from each other what exploration provides that sense of meaning so you can soar into it with each other. Another way to put it would be you're looking for a traveling companion for your one wild and precious life. That's what you need. And a few of them is better. Few of these great traveling companions that you can just be without all of the rest of that defense, denial. Udit.
Sorry, just quick question. So what about like changing beliefs? Like I had a woman who's, since our culture is so money oriented, where she wanted like the guy should be paying for everything, for example. It was a very simple thing. Traveling or doing things, going out, there was a sense that the guy should pay for everything. But the guy has different beliefs. Is it simply saying no, that this will not work, or is it about coming together? That's what he's saying, like find a meeting.
Well, what is the purpose of that? Does she have her own resources? Does she need it as
resources? Yes.
So it's not about the money,
No.
it's about the meaning of the gesture.
Right.
So in her conditioning, the male paying for the female is an expression of love and an expression of commitment. But if the male doesn't have that meaning associated with it, can he do that with the resources that he has in such a way that he understands that that's providing something that is essential for her, or can they negotiate it in such a way that that isn't what happens? So, for instance, the woman in a very traditional gendered way wants the male to pay for everything, but the male finds that if he does that, he feels unloved, and that really the only interest that the other person has is in the resources. And so that is a fairly common conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And if both parties have enough resources that it's not actually about the resource, but about the token of the expression of love, can the tokens be renegotiated in such a way that each party then succeeds in feeling loved by the expression of it? Does that make sense?
In this case, negotiation would be the guy asking the girl to I don't want to pay for the whole thing, let's share 70-30 or
whatever. Yeah, whatever it is that would be a solid win-win. So what you're doing is opening up the topic and then creatively problem solving until you come up to a solution where both parties feel loved in the gesture.
Sometimes I feel negotiation is a sacrifice. It's almost like, oh, I don't have 100, I'm gonna settle for something less. But it's
well, that would be a win-lose,
right?
And I wouldn't. You can't accept that. You could accept it, but a little while later, it's gonna resurface, and that resurfacing is the thing that destroys the hope that you can solve the problems in the relationship, or that you can negotiate the settlement in the relationship. And so you have to leave the topic open, and you have to try a lot of different things. Well, let's say the agreement is we'll split some of it, and some of it one person would pay for. Then go and do it and see whether that actually works. And if it doesn't work, engineer it until you actually come to a solution that works. Okay, I'm going to pay for all of this, but then you're going to have to do this for me so that I feel the same gesture of love that you feel when I do that for you, because this isn't actually providing that for me. So it's not durable in terms of the relationship. So totally happy to do that. You got to make it worth my while. It sounds like a transaction, except it's not a negotiation around each thing. It's a strategy for the whole relationship. That's what makes it collaborative. Good enough.
Mm-hmm.
So let's do a little meditation. All right. Let go of the meditation. So we have a class, the meditation and addiction level 2 starting next Monday. We don't quite have enough people signed up for it, so hopefully we'll get them and that will go forward. We have a level 2 starting in August, which is going to be Tuesday afternoons from 4:30 to 6:30. So the first and third Tuesdays of the month. And then in September, we have another meditation and attachment level 2 starting, which is on Friday mornings from 10:30 to 12:30, which is set up mainly for people on the East Coast or in Europe. Take a look at those. The mentoring positions in the class that's starting in August are full, but there are still some openings for the general class. And then if mentoring is something that you're interested in, it's going to have to be the September class. What else is happening? I have a couple of workshops on exploration coming up, one in September and one in October. We're really going to talk about what it is that's meaningful, how to discover what's meaningful, and to move the obstacles out of the way of really engaging in exploration. And then in October, I'm going to talk about my own exploration in photography, which is one of the central sources of meaning that I found. And how that progress goes. So take a look at those. You can do one or both. It's on the website. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your practice. I really appreciate it. I offer the teaching freely, but I do ask that if you can make a donation, that you do. There's a link on the website to do that. Help support me and also the work Mettagroup is doing. Really appreciate you. Happy that you're here. And I will see you soon, I hope. Bye.